Hello out there, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Calimesa Insider. My name is Will Kolbow. I am the city manager for the city of Calimesa. I am thrilled to be able to bring this podcast to you, to our community, to provide information, to provide education to our public, and maybe even a lesson or two, and maybe a lesson or two to other people in other cities if they're listening to this podcast, because I think some of the things that we're going to talk about are kind of universally applicable in the world of government. And again, this is all about education and information. Obviously, the focus will be on the city of Calimesa, but there are going to be some lessons, and especially in today's episode, we're going to talk about the what a general law city is, and the council manager form of government, what those things are, the role of the city council, the role of the city manager. But I also want to talk about a little bit of the history of Calimesa, just very briefly, and also talk about how I got to this job. I want to talk a little bit about myself as well, just so that you get to know me a little bit. So this show is going to be a monthly podcast starting this month, May of 2023. This recording is taking place on Friday, May 19th, 2023, just so everyone knows kind of the context and the time frame that we're talking about. And I just want to reemphasize that we are we're getting very close to adopting our budget. So our next episode, we're going to have our finance director, Celeste Reid. She'll be our first guest on the program to talk about the budget and the finance operations. So I'm looking forward to that. But we're also going to have, we're going to have somebody from the sheriff's department on, our fire department, our planning director, public works, engineering, city council members, hopefully, and also our community partners, maybe from the school district, other surrounding cities, to come on the show. And so I've got a lot of ideas and a lot of directions that I want this podcast to go in. But I figured the best place to start is talking about what my role is. And I quipped at the last city council meeting, sometimes I even ask myself, what do I do as a city manager? What does a city manager do? And I do ask myself that question sometimes, even though I'm in the job. And it's because I do a little bit of everything, and I think that is the key. But before I get into the professional aspects and what I do for the city, I do want to tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been in city government or local government for a little over 20, coming up on 20 years now. And I started my career out of college as an auditor for a firm that happened to audit local governments. On my second day of the job, I'll never forget it. It was the Tuesday following my graduation. I graduated on Saturday, and then the following Monday, I was in the office for the first day of my new job. And the second day, I was already out at an audit client. It was the city of Dana Point. And it was that point that I really got to know local government, because I hadn't really paid attention to it. My focus had been being accounting major, going to work for an accounting firm, and maybe making partner one day. And that was my original path. But then when I started auditing governments, I realized, this is actually maybe what I want to do instead. This seems like a better path for me. There's a lot of travel involved with auditing. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to, I guess you can say, be a little more, closer to my family, because I had travel that I had, it took me up north. It took me all over the place, long hours during audit season, because you're audit clients all week. So you got to kind of catch up on your actual work, and trying to get the audit clients closed out. So you're spending a lot of weekends in the office. And so it was a pretty tough life. And, I wanted just a little bit more balance. And so I decided to get on the other side of the table. So I started, I did that for about 3 years. And then I started my career in local government, actually working for local government in 2006 with the Cucamonga Valley Water District. I spent about 6 years there. I went to work for the city of San Bernardino in their water department, right in the middle of their bankruptcy. So that was really interesting. I got to learn a lot of different things. But I did work for the water department, so we did stay a little bit separated from that. And so I worked there for 2 years. It was a long 2 years. I mean, going through that atmosphere and that kind of turmoil is difficult. And so I landed at the city of Orange, where I spent the last 8.5 years prior to my arrival here in Calimesa. And I'm coming up to my 6-month anniversary here with the city already, which is astonishing to me. I mean, I can't believe it's gone by this quickly, but I guess time flies when you're having fun. And this job is really fun. It's a little bit different every day, and I'll get into a little bit more of what I do on a day-to-day basis in a little bit. On the personal side, I'm married with 3 children. I have twin 13-year-old boys, an 11-year-old girl, and they keep me very busy because all 3 of them are very active in various activities. One of my sons is a big-time runner, so it's the middle of track season right now, so we're spending a lot of time at the track on the weekends. And my daughter's a dancer, and this year she took kind of some time off from the competitive scene and has been dancing ballet, still competitively, but there's not as many ballet competitions that take place. She's only done 2 ballet competitions for the season. But, when you're in competitive dance, you're usually at about 4 or 5 different competitions before nationals, and then you have to travel for nationals, and it's a whole thing. It's usually a whole weekend because you're in a bunch of numbers and blah, blah, blah. And then my other son is he's into coding. So he's a little more on the computer side, but he's doing a lot with that. So that's a lot of fun, and really proud of my kids, and glad to, I'm part of the reason I work so hard is for them, but it's also for you, because I really care about what I do as a city manager. I really care about serving the community that I'm employed by, because after all, that is giving me the opportunity to provide these opportunities for my kids. And so I'm really appreciative of that. And so that is part of my motivation to work hard. But also, I'm a really big advocate for government working well. And I want to do my part to be able to do that. So that is a little bit about me. And so let's talk now about government structure. Let's talk about the city of Calimesa. So the city of Calimesa was incorporated in December of 1990, and that is after the original Oak Valley specific plan, by the way, which was adopted in 1988 by the County of Riverside. And that original specific plan went all the way from the Riverside-San Bernardino County border all the way down to what is now Beaumont, and then the city of Calimesa incorporated in 1990, and then later on the southern part of Oak Valley was incorporated into or annexed into the city of Beaumont in the early 2000s. So that is a little bit about the city. So we grew, if you look at Calimesa, the older part of Calimesa is on the northern end. And so even though Yucaipa is in San Bernardino County, that is really our closest tie. A lot of our service organizations, you'll notice that they are called, have a combination of Calimesa and Yucaipa in their name. And that's because the two cities really kind of grew up together, right? And so, Yucaipa was a little bit ahead of Calimesa in incorporation. And but because in California, and this isn't the case in all states, but in California it is, cities cannot cross county borders. So that is part of the reason that Yucaipa and Calimesa are two different cities, because they have a long history together. As a matter of fact, they probably might have been one city had it not been for those jurisdictional boundaries. So that is kind of how it developed, how the valley developed on the north end of our city. And now where we're seeing our growth now is all on the southern end. It's going to work its way north. All the things west of the I-10 right now, or even though I-10 is an east-west freeway, it is very much north-south through our city more so than east-west. So when I talk about that, keep in mind it's the orientation of the freeway through our community, not necessarily the cardinal directions that are stated on the freeway. So when I talk about the west side, I'm talking about the side where Summerwind is, where Mesa View Middle School is, where the future phases of Summerwin where the future Mesa Verde development will be. I'm talking about that site. It's all planned out, but the development has been slow going. And again, like I said, it's been on the books for well over 30 years. We're up on 35 years now of the original approval of that project or of those entitlements. And so it has been slow going. Like I said, most of the development for Oak Valley has occurred in Beaumont. We have seen the first phase of Summerwin come forward here in the city of Calimesa. Phase 2 is in the works right now. And so that's a little bit of history of our city. But again, I think that maybe some people that are new to the city don't realize how close of a tie we actually have to the city of Yucaipa versus the city of Beaumont, for example, which is in our own county. And that's because Beaumont has really come closer to Calimesa over the last 20 years. It wasn't necessarily it's not a city we necessarily shared a border with at our incorporation. So that's just a little bit of background there. The city of Calimesa is what is known as a general law city. So in general, there's two types of governments in California, and there is a third that has a very unique setup, and that is the city and county of San Francisco, where it's a consolidated city and county. So they're coterminous, and so that's kind of a unique setup, but every other city is either a general law city or a charter city. So we are a general law city, and what that means, basically, we can only exercise those powers as authorized by state law, whereas a charter city can establish their own rules and regulations subject to state and federal law. So, for example, you can't pass a charter to get out of SB 9, for example. That's been a big law that we've talked about with with lot splits and things like that, and SB 35, which allows for ministerial approval of certain housing projects, because those laws specifically say they're also applicable to charter cities. So when these forms of legislation come through, a lot of times what they will do is include provisions that say, yes, this applies also to charter cities as well. It's assumed that they apply to general law cities because we are subject to the powers that are authorized by, like I said, by state law, but then they also will extend some of these things to charter cities. Now, charters can come in lots of different forms, and we have two good examples of that here in Riverside County. The first one is the city of Riverside, obviously the biggest city in our county. It is the county seat, and we have it has the largest population. And so their charter is a full charter. Like they have, it lays out their entire powers, and it's a very extensive document. And the charter in general can only be amended by a vote of the people. So it is kind of like the constitution of the city. Like the state has a constitution, and the only way you can modify the state constitution is through a vote. The legislature cannot change the constitution on their own. And so the city council also cannot change a charter on its own. So they basically govern themselves subject to federal and state law, but they have a lot more autonomy in terms of how they operate their day-to-day operations. And in a big city like that, an older city like that, that makes more sense. Smaller cities, it doesn't make as much sense, but there is an exception to that, and that is in the city of Norco. So the city of Norco is a charter city as well, even though it has a population of about only 25,000 or so. So not a little bit, bigger than Calimesa, but not substantially bigger. But their charter basically says that, number one, general law governs. So they are still saying we are subject to the general laws of the which apply to cities, just like Calimesa is. They distinguish what form of government they're going to have, which is council manager, which is the same as the city of Calimesa. But they specifically wanted to pass things that protected their animal keeping rights, zoning rights, and horse trails. So obviously Norco is known as Horse Town USA. So they wanted to keep certain aspects in their municipal code from being changed with some greater threshold. So, and they then lay out certain provisions in their municipal code that can only be changed by a supermajority of the city council rather than a simple majority, which is how most things are changed. So theirs is, and then they also made themselves exempt from prevailing wage law, and then also said any amendments, revisions, or repeals to the charter has to be devoted to the people. So again, it's not a strong charter, but it's more of a statement, and it actually raises the threshold of changing certain aspects of their municipal code. So their charter is actually very, very short. It's very small, and it applies to these specific provisions in their municipal code. And there's about a list of about a dozen or so that this is applicable to. And but everything else is, they operate just like a general law city, just like the city of Calimesa does. So that is an interesting thing. And sometimes, people talk about charters and they wanted to do certain things. And so Norco was very specific to something that the community, that their heritage was related to. And that is something that Norco is famous for. And so they wanted to make sure that it was codified in a charter to protect them, and also make a statement that this is who we are and this is what we believe and this is where we want to make sure that the council is more careful about how they govern the municipal code. So that's a little bit about a general law city versus a charter city. Now, in a council manager form of government versus a strong mayor government, there's only 5 cities in California that are actually strong mayor cities, and that's Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Fresno, and Oakland are the 5 that are in a council or a strong mayor form of government. The rest of the cities are what is called a council manager form of government. So the city council hires a city manager that then carries out the day-to-day operations of the city. So that's me, the city. I am the city manager, right? So I serve at the pleasure of the city council. They can vote to terminate me at any time. And so that's why the city manager has to play the role of understanding politics, but not being political themselves. And I think that's where some city managers get in trouble, that they get a little too big for their britches, so to speak, and they forget their role as policy implementers versus policy makers. And sometimes, a city council may hire a city manager because he or she is in line with their political philosophies. Well, if the council changes, that city manager is probably more vulnerable to being turned over, versus going through a process to hire somebody that the city council understands what the role of the city manager is and tries to bring in somebody that is apolitical but understands politics. So you have to understand and interpret what the direction is of the city council, what the kind of the attitude of the city council is towards certain things, and craft your policy recommendations around that, but also being flexible enough to where if the council does change, that you can then shift how you operate the city and how you're running the day-to-day operations. So that is the most important thing that I do, is I manage the day-to-day operations of the city based on the strategic direction and policy direction of the city council. You can kind of think of it as how you think of a private corporate or a publicly traded corporation, right? So you have your shareholders, which in this case are the voters of the city of Calimesa, and the shareholders appoint a board of directors. Now, the way it works in corporate world is that you get votes proportionate to the amount of shares that you hold. Everybody in Calimesa, has one vote. So everyone's an equal shareholder, right? So every single that person has one vote, and that is their vote, and their vote carries as much weight as anybody else in the city, right? When they're electing the city council. So your city council is your board of directors. The board of directors in a corporation will then hire a CEO to actually run the company, right? Now, there are some differences between what a city manager can and can't do versus what a CEO can and can't do, right? So usually a CEO has a lot more autonomy in terms of operating and making policy direction at a corporation, whereas the city manager's role is very better defined in terms of the delineation between what the city council does and the city manager does, right? So I oversee staff. I communicate frequently to council so that they're up to date on things that are happening in the city. I serve on various boards, advisory boards. So, for example, I'm on the Western Riverside Council of Governments Technical Advisory Committee. All the city managers of the WRCOG are on that committee, and then we make recommendations to the executive committee, which is made up of elected officials. So every city has one of their elected officials on the executive committee board. So that's just one example. I also engage in advocacy, and so I pay attention to bills that could affect the city of Calimesa, and I make recommendations and keep the council up to date on those things. Sometimes we will bring those forward to the city council for consideration on, whether to take a position on a bill. We did that recently, and the council decided not to take a position on a particular bill, even though the League of California Cities had requested that the city council oppose it. But that's, again, those are policy recommendations, those are policy directions, and we go say, hey, the league has asked us to take a position on this. They are asking us to oppose a certain bill. The council can say, yes, we want to do that, or they can say, no, we want to actually say that we support a bill or a referendum measure, or we don't want to take a position on it at all, and that's okay. And so that is my job, is to kind of bring those things forward and understand where my council is, and I don't want to make a recommendation that they're going to reject, because then that makes it seem like I'm not in sync with where they are. But a future council may have a different position. And so my recommendations will change based on what that is. And so if I'm doing a good job of that, it doesn't really matter who is on the city council, as long as their directions are not illegal and not unethical. I will take those directions and I will do my best to implement them. Right. I collaborate a lot with other organizations, other jurisdictions. So whether it's Yucaipa Valley Water District or the school districts or other cities around us, we do a lot of work. We're doing a lot of work right now with the city of Yucaipa. So we have a lot of interaction with that. So I work with their staff and city manager to try to make sure those projects are moving along in the way they should, and other projects that are in the pipeline that we're working together on those. And so there's a lot of things that happen with that as well. So the role of the city manager, and the thing that I love about this job, probably the biggest thing that I love about this job, is no 2 days are exactly the same. Right. And so, and also, oh, by the way, I put together the budget for the council to consider. So we make recommendations about things to include in the budget, and also take feedback from, our processes. It goes to the finance committee. Then we have a workshop, which by the time you hear this podcast, you probably have already, the workshop has already taken place. But as I'm recording this podcast, it has not taken place. So, that is one of the most important things we do too. We talk about land use. I work with the planning staff to try to make those things happen and marry the priorities and the direction of council with that kind of thing. But again, like we talked about in our land use workshop on staff's end, it's my job to make sure that we're processing things in an objective manner, that we're giving people due process. Those applicants due process, specifically because they have that right to due process, because they are the applicant, they're the ones that are being judged, and that's why they are the ones that are subject to due process. And so we explain that in that land use workshop. If you haven't watched that land use workshop, by the way, you can find it on our Facebook page, you can find it on our YouTube page, or you can go to our website at cityofcalimesa.net, click on agendas and minutes, and you'll be able to find a link to the video for that special workshop that took place on April 22nd, 2023. So I really hope that you'll check that out. But this job is fun. It's challenging. It's very challenging because sometimes the public's not so nice to us, and that's part of the deal, right? I mean, we have to have thick skin, and we're not going to make, as Lincoln said, you're not going to please all the people all the time. And I certainly understand that. Our staff understands that. And sometimes, we get criticized for, what we're doing as a city, and that's part of what comes with this job. I mean, that is part of the deal. So anyway, that is kind of what I do as city manager. And in a city like ours, having such a small staff, I do a lot of analyst work too, right? So things that maybe in other cities, in bigger cities, would be handed off to another person, or I would be able to delegate. Those are things that I have to take on myself. So I'm a very much a working manager, and I think all of our department heads are working managers as well. And that can be both challenging and rewarding because you have a better pulse of what is happening in the day-to-day operations. I'm closer to it. So I'm not as, I'm more engaged in the day-to-day operations. And so if there are questions about things that are happening, I'm more abreast of what's happening than maybe a city manager in a bigger city. Like, for example, Riverside, a city that has, over 2,000 people working for it. I mean, how does the city manager keep a pulse on every single little thing that's working? Well, he doesn't. I mean, it's just impossible. He's only one person. So he's got to keep his focus very, very big picture. And I have the time actually to talk to residents one-on-one. Not a lot because there's a lot going on, but I try to make time for people that want it, that have questions, that care about the community. If you're taking the time to reach out to me and have questions and want to have the conversation, I want to try to make time for you because I realize that our residents are busy and they have their own lives and they're busy on their day-to-day, just living their life and their careers and things like that. But if they care enough about their city, I want to be able to take the time to meet with them. So that is something that as a city manager I do too, is making sure that I'm engaged with the public. And this is another way to do it, is this podcast. So as we have future episodes, we're going to talk about other specific aspects of our government and how they work and how does the budget get built, for example. That'll be our next episode. And it's kind of like this, how the sausage gets made type of thing. And I think if we understand how things are done and why things are done the way they are, I think it then leads to better dialogue in the future because now we both have an understanding of each other, because I think sometimes there's misunderstandings about why the city does things and what the city can do and what it can't do. So I think having those conversations and getting those things up front, when we talk like about economic development, for example, those are kind of the things that we'll talk about. So with that, I thank you for joining us on this month's podcast. Next month, we will be joined by our finance director, Celeste Reid. As I mentioned earlier, she will talk to us about her background, and she's got a pretty fascinating background, I think. We'll talk about the finance operations, and by the time we record the next episode, the budget will likely have been approved, so we can talk about the recently approved budget as well. Just remember that our city council meets every first and third Monday of the month. So our next one as we record is their special budget workshop this Monday, May 22nd. But by the time you probably listen to this, it probably already occurred. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting is Monday, June 5th. Visit our website at cityofcalimesa.net to find links to all of our social media pages for news, updates, and information. Those are where we have the updates most often, but you can find the links to all of those at the top of our homepage at cityofcalimesa.net. You can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast catcher, whether it's Apple Podcasts or other kind of things, Spotify, whatever you want to listen to. Or if you want to just find links to those, just visit our website visit the podcast website at cityofcalimesa.net/podcast. Until next time, stay safe, and I will talk to you again next month. Thank you for joining us.